My name is Christopher James Burns, and the title of my show in the Sunken Gallery at the Mac is Limbo Land. So the title of the exhibition, Limbo Land, came from Seamus Heaney, the poet. He used the term Limbo Land quite a few times over the course of his career to refer to the north of Ireland or Northern Ireland. Obviously, even language itself here is kind of contested, so even the term Northern Ireland has kind of political leaning. So he found this term Limbo Land, which obviously he felt embodied what this place was, or the particular peculiarities of its context. I thought it really did sum up where I called home, and in some way kind of reflected some of the concerns that I have within my practice. In my practice, I nearly always work with found object, and they can range from objects that I've sourced in different places, whether they be objects that have been in my family for many generations, objects that I have carried with me maybe through my practice for the kind of last 10 years, or objects that I specifically seek out because I want to kind of use their symbology or their connotations that the kind of viewer will bring to the objects. So I'll work on the surface of these objects, I'll team them together, I'll maybe cast them together into one solid form. And then they're presented in the gallery in almost a conversation. They're all in dialogue with each other. Some are in little groupings, but the way they are presented across the gallery was supposed to kind of explore the idea of a landscape. And so they're all in kind of conversation with each other, and you can see some through others. If, for example, we look at the very first piece that you would see at the very first plinth as you enter the space, it's kind of a metal spiral. It's part of a clock. There's quite a few works in this exhibition that are for old clock parts. And the spiral has been drawn up, it has been pulled out to create this structure, which I was thinking about fairy thorns and structures like that in the landscape, where people come along and they tie ribbons and they tie cloths onto the structure. And the metal spiral has a series of little pieces of different coloured string that I found on a beach and tied across the structure, going up in this kind of spiraled way. It also has a little kind of companion piece just sitting beside it, again constructed through little parts of a clock, but one of those pieces has a little holy medal attached to it. There's a kind of devotive quality to lots of the works. They seem like quite personal objects. They seem quite sacred in some ways as well, in terms of the way they're lit, in terms of the way they're elevated. They're dimly lit, so I think it creates a kind of curiosity, hopefully, within the viewer, that they'll want to get closer and peer into the objects. But they're also elevated in a way that suggests they could be a museum artifact or some kind of holy object or relic. And that comes across through the objects themselves and in terms of what they are, but also in terms of some of the commentary that I'm making on some of the larger objects themselves. So there's a series of postcards, for example, through the work, which are exploring the idea of monuments, of memorial, of what and who we choose to create a permanent structure and memory of in our society, in our everyday landscape. Many of those monuments that I'm working with in the show no longer exist. So they have clearly had their own kind of contested history, and they've been challenged. And the way in which the works are presented heightens this idea of them being within a landscape, and how things play off each other and how they communicate with each other. Some of the objects in this space I've used before in previous works. I'm graduated from art school now about 10 years. And so the work almost has a life of its own. There's almost my own visual language that has came about through the work. So some of those pieces I've used before, and I'm using them in a different context now in these works. And some of the pieces I've never used before, they're kind of new to me. There's a thread, I think, of religious imagery and iconography through the work that has often came across through my practice over the last few years. If we look at older works, right back from kind of 2010, 2011, and working with very similar objects, maybe just slightly the way I work with them has changed. At the beginning, it would have been more in terms of simply their positioning together. Now I'm beginning to cast the pieces together. I'm giving a permanence to their connection, and in overall, and perhaps the object that's created. The society here in Belfast and wider society in Northern Ireland is infused with symbols, with markers, with boundaries that are very often invisible to the visitor, but for a local person are highly kind of potent imagery that we can read, and we can read very subtly without even realizing sometimes that we're responding to that. And I think the work has that kind of idea embedded within it. So there's all sorts of objects which refer to cultural traditions, and even in terms of colour and in their placement in the gallery space, which are kind of loaded. They're loaded imagery that viewers will have their own relationship with before they even come to the exhibition. That can be different for a viewer not from here. Their reading of the work will be challenged, will be different, but that's very much as their experience of this place would be. And so I don't mind that some of those things are kind of lost in translation. I feel I have to make work that's particular to here because this is what I know, this is my life. And yet, when you start to have conversation with some of these people about some of these things, there's parallels with other parts of the world and other experiences in terms of how imagery can be loaded and how we have these cultural symbols within it. As a society here as well, I think we're very often pushed into these kind of binary categories, these kind of two main traditions, and yet life for so many of us falls somewhere between the two, or is a hybrid of both. And that's certainly my experience, and I think that's the place that the work comes out of. It is that liminal in-between space between those traditions and between those cultures.